Hi everybody. So in today's video, we're going to be reviewing how to write the equation of a line. So in order to do that, I want to start by reviewing what the equation of a line should look like at the end of a problem. Here's an example. To write the equation of a line, we want our answer to look like this. Either y equals 7 plus 2 parentheses x minus 1, or we want our equation to look like this. Y equals 8 minus 1/3 x. Now, in this equation, it's important to know what each of these numbers represents, so where those numbers come from. So in these equations, the first number is always your starting y value. So this 7 would be the starting y value. The number in the middle is always going to be your slope. So this middle number will be your slope, which is your pattern from the problem. And this ending number here, or in this case where there's just an x with nothing there, is going to be your starting x value. But the trick here is that when it comes to x, this number is always the opposite of the starting x. So for example, because this first problem has a -1 in it, that original number would have been a +1. It's always the opposite of whatever was originally there. In this last problem, if there's no parentheses here, then that means that your starting x must have been 0. So that's why, because if you add or subtract a 0, it doesn't have any result. So it would just be x. So let's look through some examples where you can kind of see how we might write these equations. In problem number 1, there are two important pieces of given information in this problem. The first important piece of given information is that we are writing the equation of a line that goes through the point -3, 7. And the second important piece of information is that the slope of this line is 5. Now, before you do anything else, what you want to do is kind of make a little organizer so that you can kind of see all your information in one spot. So if I go through the point -3, 7, then that means that the x value of the starting point would be -3, and the y value would be 7. If I have a slope of 5, then that means that on the side, I'm just going to write that my slope is 5. Now, because I have a starting point and a slope, which means I have a starting x, I have a starting y, and I have a slope, I can go ahead and put that together to make my equation. So here's how I would do that. I would start with y equals. Now, right after the letter y, you're always going to put the starting number for y. In this case, the starting number for y would be 7. So y equals the starting number for y. Just like we said at the top that the starting y value is always the first number in the equation. Next, you need your slope. So in the middle, the next number is going to be your slope. In this case, because my slope is 5, is +5, in my equation, I'm going to write +5 because that's a +5. And then I'm going to put parentheses x. And after I put that, because that's always going to go there, parentheses x, next I'm going to look at the starting x value. In this problem, the starting x value is -3. Now remember, in our equation, we always use the opposite of the x. So the -3 is going to become a +3 in the equation that we're writing. It's always the opposite. Now, the x is the only number that's the opposite, so that's the only time you have to worry about not using the exact same number from the problem, but actually changing it to the opposite. All right, in our second example, we have a very similar situation, but instead of being given a point and a slope, we're actually given 2 points here. So the first point is 2, 6, and the second point is going to be -3, 9. I'm still going to start the same way by organizing my information. So in my table, This time, I'm just going to organize it and make 2 points. The first point is 2, 6, which goes right next to each other, x and y in the table. It's a pair. And the next point is -3 and 9. Again, that goes right next to each other like a pair of numbers in the table. Now, we do need to know a slope, but instead of being told the slope here, we're going to need to figure out the slope. So this is where it's going to be really helpful to review how to find a slope. A slope is always going to be the change in y over the change in x. Now, to find the change in y, I'm going to look at the y values on the table. If I go from 6 to 9, I'm going up by 3. So in my slope, my change in y would be +3 because I'm going up by 3. And my change in x, I'm going from 2 to -3. So I'm going down by 5. So my change in x would be -5. So you're just using the numbers from the table to get your slope. Now you have a point. You actually have 2 points. So you have more than you need, and you have a slope. So we can write our equation. So we're going to start with y equals. And just like before, right after the letter y, you're going to put the starting y number, which in this case is a 6. Then you're going to use your slope. Now, in this case, the slope is negative. It has this little minus here. So in the equation, I'm going to write -3/5. So I'm putting that minus as a subtraction now. And then I'm going to put parentheses x, just like I did before. And then I'm going to look at the starting x value. Now, the starting x value here is a +2. But we need to remember that when it comes to x, x is always the opposite. So when we had a -3, we have a +3 in the equation. If we have a +2, we're going to have a -2 in the equation that we're writing. And that's your final answer. Let's try this again, only this time, instead of having information where we have a point and a slope or 2 points, we have the graph of a line. In this case, the best thing that you can do to help yourself is to actually make a table of values using the points that you find on the graph. So if I look for some nice points on this graph, the first one would be here, which is the point -4 and +1. So I would write -4, +1. The next nice point here would be right here. So that would be the point -2, +2. The next point would be the point right here, which would be the point 0, 3. The next nice point would be the point right here, which would be the point 2, 4. Now, just like before, we could keep going. There's actually another nice point all the way at the end, but we've got enough now to kind of make our equation. The next thing we're going to need to know is our slope. So just like before, we're going to use the table of values that we made in order to find the slope of the line. So the slope is always going to be change in y divided by change in x. My change in y is going to be going from 1 to 2, so I'm going to be adding 1. So +1 will go on the top. And my change in x for those same 2 points will be going from -4 to -2. So I'm adding 2 again. So I'm going to go up by +2. So my slope would be +1 over +2. Now the equation of my line would be y equals my starting y value, which is 1. And then my slope, which is +1/2, so +1/2. And then parentheses x. And then my starting x value, which is -4. Now remember, we always use the opposite. So I'm going to put +4 here because the x should always be the opposite of the number that was already there. Last but not least, let's talk about what we do if we're given a table of values. Now, we've done these problems with tables of values. Problem number 3, we started with the graph, but we made a table of values. Problem number 2, we started with 2 points, but we made a table of values. The same thing's going to happen in number 4, only the table of values is already there. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to need to find my slope. My slope is going to be change in y over change in x. So change in y is going to be, I'm going to pick the bottom two numbers here because why not? From 11 to 14, you're going to be adding 3. So my change in y will be positive 3. And then change in x will be here. If I go from 2 to 3, I'm going to be adding 1. So I'm going to put a positive 1 here. So that's my slope now. I've got my slope. I've got a table of values. I'm ready to go. I'm going to write y equals my starting y value. So my starting y value is going to be negative 1. Then I'm going to fill in my slope. My slope is positive 3 over 1. And then I'm going to put parentheses x, and I'm going to look back at the starting x value. Now, the starting x value here is negative 2, but I always want to use the opposite. So I'm going to have to do positive 2 here in order to write my equation. So this, remember, is always the opposite. It's the only number that's always the opposite is the x. All right, those are some examples of how you would write the equation of a line. Your job next is going to be to do some practice problems and then hopefully be able to retake and do better on your retake.